the new social contract. Give me an overview of your thesis here.
Well, what the key focus of the book is to look at liberalism and what makes Australian liberalism unique in comparison to the other traditions, and then to look and assess, well, what's actually happening to liberalism? Which direction is it heading? Why is it heading in that direction? And then against the practical reality, which is that political ideology is there to deliver and improve society for people, and that there are some serious challenges that we face as Australia, as part of a liberal tradition as well, around making sure that younger Australians, who are the largest voting demographic in Australia today, are able to realise their full ambition and their aspirations for themselves and their families, and then how to address that. So it's looked specifically at young Australians and what that impact will then have, their demographic takeover will have for politics in Australia over, well, what I would have said is the forthcoming decade, but in practice, because of COVID-19, many of the issues that I've raised, particularly around the challenges of home ownership, are probably going to be brought forward considerably because of the job impacts as well as the home ownership impacts that COVID-19 will have.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. A lot of the themes in this book, even though you've been working on them for a while, we've been talking about them for a while, have really come into focus right now. But let's start with the young Australians. I see you as one of their representatives in Parliament, certainly younger than I am. But the point here is we've been losing young voters in quite considerable numbers. I mean, it's always been true that the younger you are, the more likely you are to vote for Labor. Everybody grows up eventually, we hope. But those numbers are stark now. And it's not just here, is it, Tim? Around the world, you could look at Britain, New Zealand, United States, you'd find this great widening between the generations on how they vote. Why is that?
That's right, and I used some pretty simple numbers from the Australian Electoral Survey, which showed that at the 2004 election, just under 50% of people under the age of 35 voted for the Liberal Party. Today, it's at 23%, which is a pretty stark contrast within a very short time frame. But it also says something, and it's consistent with what's happening in the UK, where younger voters have drifted off, not just towards age being the primary divider. YouGov did analysis, which it's now the primary indicator of how people's electoral behaviour, but that, of course, young people aren't just going more to the Labor Party, and inverse, older people tend to be going more towards the Conservatives. It's that younger people are going to the more radical part of the Labor Party, demonstrated most clearly under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. The same is also true in the United States under Bernie Sanders. Now, I fully accept and acknowledge that both Corbyn and Sanders were defeated, but the candidates were defeated. The issues that they were raising and championing, which got the hearts and blood pumping of younger Brits and Americans, and to a certain extent that is arising now in Australia, shouldn't be ignored, because a champion will rise for them and the issues they raise, because the issues remain unaddressed. So, and in the end, it comes down to a simple proposition, which is many young Americans and young Brits feel that the economic system isn't working for them. There was a book that was written by David Willits, a former Conservative MP in the UK, called The Pinch, how baby boomers stole the millennials' opportunity and why they need to get it back. And it sort of outlined some of the economic challenges arising now. Because Australia hasn't had a recession until now, we've largely avoided that. But when I started writing the book, my point was to say, be careful, this is coming. Yeah. All we need is a recession potentially to trigger it. COVID-19 health crisis is now creating an economic crisis, which will have generational impacts. And unfortunately, I think will bring a lot of the issues I raised forward.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there are lots of ways we can try to explain this divide in the voting pattern. Cultural differences, education, etc. But you've hit on something which I think very few others have, which I think is key to this, and that is the economic divide. So in essence, we've got a divide between the interests of people with assets. Most Australians over 55 say will have much more in the way of assets than their parents' generation. They're asset rich in a sense, even though some of us may not feel it. And at the other end, you've got people starting out asset poor on income. Now, this is and in economic terms, of course, this comes to the fore on the issue of taxation. Tell me how.
Oh, I just want to address on that point, which is that young people have always been asset poor. I mean, obviously there'll be a small number of people who will inherit assets, but that's not the common trend. The key point is that as people move through their stage of life, they use their income and accumulate assets and put themselves in a position where they have something to secure. The difference is that traditionally, if you go back to when the age pension was originally introduced, people finished working about 65 and the average life expectancy was only about 68. So they didn't need much in terms of assets. Part of the challenge is that baby boomers, not just them, but they're obviously the other large demographic group, have a particular interest in conserving their wealth. And it's not, I mean, obviously there'll always be selfish components to that, but the truth is it's because baby boomers don't know how long they're going to live for. They don't know how much income they're going to need, and they don't understand how they're going to be in a position to keep supporting themselves when they might live, sort of a quarter to even a third of their life not working and it all being in front of them. And the point I raise and the concern I raise is how the tax system treats people differentially. If you're in the top income earning bracket of income earners, which is often between the age of about 35 and 55, you're paying a marginal rate of about 47 cents, or you're paying a marginal rate of around 47 cents if you're in the top. Whereas, of course, when you're retired, because most of our tax base is drawn from income tax, you're not paying much in terms of tax at all. That's not a criticism of older Australians. It's just an observation about the tax system. In fact, 2015, the Productivity Commission did a report called Tax and Transfer Incidents in Australia and highlighted that, of course, once people retire, the main tax people pay is the GST, consumption tax, but it's also the lowest tax rate that we apply. And so you've got people who have the most wealth also concurrently paying the lowest tax rate for the overwhelming level of economic activity. But the other part, and this is why you can't talk about cutting spending and without having a discussion around tax as well, is that most of the big areas of growth of public expenditure are for older Australians. Pensions, aged care, healthcare at the most expensive time in your life. Most of your large chunk of your healthcare expenses occurs towards the latter stages of your life. And of course, the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. So it's actually really a discussion around responsibility and how people carry responsibility in a society like ours.
Yeah, well, I can see we're going to have a good argument over this one, Tim. So yeah, I mean, I understand.
Well, it's not going to be an argument. It's actually, the data is quite
sure,
clear.
but
and the problem then is, how do you address it politically
quite.
to improve society?
Yeah, but let's go to the implications here. So you've got this younger age group, and another thing that's happening, of course, is that the proportion of the population that is actually in working age is narrowing all the time. So a smaller number of people of working age paying income tax are supporting a larger group who aren't working, right? So you can see the amount of income compared to the amount of wealth shrinks. So you've got a problem with your taxation base. We know this is happening, but let's go to the question of equity and fairness here. Let's remember that everybody in the older age bracket, baby boomers and older sometimes, who have wealth, have accumulated that wealth with post-tax dollars, because we had a system given to us here which is completely bonkers. We're the only country in the world, I think, that decided we would tax people on their as they save, and then give them not tax them when they take that money out. Every other sensible superannuation system does it the other way, right? So how do you now reverse that?
Part of the key point of the book is to focus on what the fundamental underlying problems are, because if you identify the problems, I think the solutions largely present themselves, but they require a high degree of political appetite, because one of the critical points I make in the book, and I've already said it, is that quite justifiably, when people reach a certain age, they're interested in how to conserve their financial security, because they have to. And so government has to tread very carefully. But the practical reality is if the government doesn't start to address these challenges now, the number of baby boomers will, through natural attrition, if I say it politely, diminish, while the number of people who are supporting them is only going to increase as a section of the population, because we've never had so many old people, or we've never had so many young people, and so few in between. And so it's a big political challenge. But my key point is that really people have to pay a lifetime of tax. They always have to carry some of the share of the burden of society. And it doesn't matter who it is. And that the best way to do that is to even out tax rates across people's life cycle. Because at the moment, basically we tax people between a period of 35 and 55 when you deal with tax and transfers and look at who carries the cost. And as you said, at the moment, there's a diminishing number of people in that group, so a smaller number of people paying for more of the cost of society. And so we've got to find a way to share it and make it more consistent. Also to stop the distortions of economic activity, particularly in people putting too much capital in housing. And we do that because, of course, housing is tax-free if it's your principal place of residence. But all that does is push up house prices for younger Australians. And I say that not just because, obviously, and I just need to be clear, I own my own home, so it's not going to affect me. This isn't a personal case I'm making. It's because if you actually look at people's political life cycles, there's always been young people who voted more for the left and older people more for the right, for want of a better phrase. But what actually happens is people change their electoral behaviour around sort of two significant lifestyle events. The first one is people get married, and the second one is they buy a house. So if you're a Liberal and you want more people to vote Liberal, you actually need that conversion point to occur. And what's happening because of our tax system, not in isolation, but a lot of it's our tax system, is that it's actually delaying out how long that conversion occurs, if it occurs at all. Home ownership rates amongst younger Australians are in freefall.
Well, this is the point at which I think you address something which is very key to Menzies' approach to liberalism, which was that owning a home was an important thing. It had a public good. People were better citizens. They were more responsible. And Menzies, of course, increased home ownership from roughly 50% to 70%. Now we're slipping behind. We're moving behind. That's got to be a concern to every Liberal in the country, and what we do about it.
Absolutely. And the point is that Menzies talked about the importance of home ownership on different levels. There was the, shall we say, spiritual or emotional component of it, of home's material, etc., that he talked about in his Forgotten People speeches. But the other point he made, and I've picked it up in a couple of speeches that I think others perhaps haven't paid as much attention to, is he really said buying your own home is the foundation of people becoming little capitalists and being able to be much more active contributors to the economy overall. So it has an interest in people obviously creating security, a place where they can raise their family, and to take a sense of civic pride in their life. And all of those things are true, but it's the basis in which people then become more economically responsible or contributory. And of course, a lot of people who have small businesses use their home as a security to then go off and set up a small business and the like. And so home ownership is a critical part of this conversation for the country. And when you've got home ownership rates going down, in fact, every single age group is seeing a reduction in home ownership rates, except for over 65s in the top economic quintile. And when you get to the sub 40 or 45-year-old bracket, it's not going down. It's basically in free fall. It sends a worrying sign about where we're going to be, at least because more and more young Australians are dependent on their parents to buy their own home, getting financial assistance from their parents. Now, when most Australians hold most of their wealth, and this is clear in the data, in a principal place of residence and also in their superannuation, it means that we're creating this almost hereditary system where the next generation's capacity to buy a home is heavily dependent on the decisions their parents made, which is fine if your parents owned a home, but it's not so great if you didn't, for new migrants, for people who have arrived in Australia without any wealth, or of course people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds.
So your colleague, Senator Andrew Bragg's, opened up a real debate now on superannuation in the party. He wasn't alone. I mean, there have been lots of people talking and thinking about this, you included.
Yep.
But he's put in a book, which I guess gives him bragging rights, if I could say that. But look, here's the point. Is superannuation one of the things that we can adjust to make it easier for young people to save for their own homes?
Well, so one of the things I do in this book is say basically nothing should be off the table. I think it's so important for the health of the nation, and that includes touching difficult conversations in tax, and super has to be at least part of the consideration as well. Because one of the things that's an oddity is the most important financial decision you can make for your retirement security is not super. The most important financial decision you can make for your financial security, health and well-being for your retirement is owning your own home. Super is on top of that and adds benefits, but if you don't own your own home, most of that super is going to go towards paying for a home anyway. So I think it's a real oddity that we say it's better for people to prioritise saving for saving today for a pool of cash you'll need, say, if you're 20, for nearly 50 years' time, when buying a home not just delivers you a dividend then, it delivers you a dividend throughout every other stage of your life. And so I think there does need to be a reassessment about what our priorities are, because it enables, if we were to prioritise home ownership over super, what you have is younger Australians living better lives throughout their whole life cycle and having more retirement security than prioritising superannuation.
So, just in closing, let's talk about the party, the Liberal Party. It seems to me that one of the great challenges for the party in coming years is to bring together these two groups you've identified: the youthful asset poor and the elderly or wealthy or more elderly asset rich, with their divergent interests and increasingly cultural differences opening up on things as we know. Can we do this, or is the party inevitably heading down a route that it will be the old people's party?
I don't think we need accept any fate in this discussion. I think the key thing is to look and understand the nature of the problem, which is this divide that's occurring, and then say, okay, how do we address the fundamental underpinnings? Because what it actually takes you to is more liberal answers. More consistent tax rates, addressing and shifting the tax base, as but one of many examples, is fundamentally liberal policy. Increasing home ownership levels is fundamentally liberal policy. But you've got to be prepared to confront the nature of the problem, which is, as I said, now been brought forward even more so by COVID-19, because it's really about enabling Australians to live out the aspirations of their life. And of course, within the parliamentary party, we have a diversity of perspectives on these issues, and it's really about finding the way to that tension. So do I think it can be done? As resolutely, yes. But it requires, frankly, a focus, and I would argue even sometimes perhaps a crisis. And so you almost have to say there's no better time to confront these fundamental problems than now.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for this important contribution to what has become, I think, a very lively and helpful debate within the parliamentary party about some of these fundamental issues. Thanks very much, and we hope to have you back to talk about this again at some future time.
Thanks, Nick. Take care.